Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Astana Finance Days. I'm Tim Bennett, the Chair of AIX, and it's a pleasure to welcome you all here. Just before we get started, I've been asked to give you a couple of housekeeping matters. Firstly, there's a QR code on your name badge. If you scan that code, you can join the AIFC Telegram channel, and we'll give you some updates during the course of the day, and also download the speeches and presentations to refresh your memories. I'd encourage you all to participate in the sessions, and we will be taking questions at the conclusion of the session. The second thing is, if there is an emergency, there are 3 exits to this building. Over on the right, there's an emergency exit, the doors at the front, and if you go straight to the back of the building, there's a final exit in the very, hopefully remote event that we will need to leave the building. Before we start the session, I'd like to welcome the Governor of the AIFC, Renat Bekturov, to welcome you all here today. Renat.
Thank you, Tim. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to see you all at Astana Finance Days 2023, and especially I welcome you on our annual Capital Markets Forum, which is hosted and organized by Astana International Exchange. And today we have already started discussing that the importance of the capital markets to attract the capital, to mobilize the capital, and to grow the best ideas, to fund the best ideas. And here at AIFC, we have created Astana International Exchange exactly for that reason, so that the capital market can be vibrant, can be liquid, which I think, again, is critical to attracting investment, because that helps to reduce the premium that investor wants and also creates the opportunity for exits for those investors who want to exit the market, of course. And of course, the AIX functions on the platform of AIFC, where we have created an international standard jurisdiction, international standards regulation. Again, we today have invited a lot of the distinguished guest speakers from the national agencies, from government bodies, from the private sector, who will be discussing today the development of the stock market, of the capital market in Kazakhstan, what else we can do to further actually enhance it, to further keep on building on it. And using this opportunity, I would like to share with you the news that today Astana International Exchange will be signing an agreement with Abu Dhabi Stock Exchange to join Tabadul Digital Exchange Hub, which actually allows investors on both sides, through the authorized brokers, to trade security on the markets without actually dual listing. So the liquidity will not be splitting. It actually be consolidating relevantly on the securities listed on ADX and with the Kazakh securities on AIX. I think that is going to be a big step forward that will help investors to have a wider choice of securities to invest. And I mean, of those who follow Middle Eastern market probably know how IPOs are doing great in the Gulf, but also will have the issuers here to build liquidity to attract capital. Again, I think it's an exciting news. We will be enjoying the signing ceremony later during the day, and this is only one of the news that we have prepared for you today. Again, welcome to the annual Capital Markets Forum, and enjoy. I hope this will be very helpful and very fruitful discussion. Thank you, Tim.
Thanks, Renat, for that warm welcome. The topic today is global perspectives on the macroeconomy. Now, in any year, that will be a difficult topic to comment on, but in a year like this year, it's almost impossible. If we look around the world, it's a very uncertain economic environment. Yes, economic growth is good, and in some cases, including Kazakhstan, increasing. We've got very high levels of employment, sort of unprecedentedly high levels of employment around the world. Indeed, a shortage of labour. But on the other side of the coin, obviously, we've got inflation, which has continued to rise against expectations. And as a result, we're seeing central banks aggressively tightening. We're seeing interest rates in a lot of countries that we haven't seen in a generation as well. And at least in my part of the world, you've got central banks like Australia who raised interest rates by 25 basis points yesterday, continuing to surprise in terms of their aggressiveness to fight inflation. Of course, Kazakhstan not only needs to cope with that, but also is in a very interesting geopolitical environment. Certainly to the north and the east, we're in the middle of a conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and certainly some tensions between China and the US. Remarkably, Kazakhstan over the last couple of years has navigated both the economic and geopolitical challenges extremely well. But of course, there is still a lot of uncertainty ahead. So I'm very pleased to welcome what is a great group of speakers this morning to talk about these topics. And as I said, we'll answer some questions from the floor. So firstly, let me introduce our speakers, and I'll start over on my right. Firstly, from the Deputy Governor of the National Bank, and we're very pleased to have you here, Akylzhan Baimagambetov. Secondly, the Deputy Minister of the National Economy, Azamat, who will speak for his minister, who has been called to Parliament. So we thank you very much for stepping in at the last minute. Yernar, Zhanadil, who's the Managing Director of Privatization at Samruk-Kazyna, very familiar to us at AIX and AIFC, and again, we really appreciate Samruk's support and their contribution today. And as Renat said, a couple of people from the private sector to give their perspectives on the economy and the global outlook. Elena, who's from Standard & Poor's, who covers the region, a range of interesting countries, including, of course, the CIS, and most notably, when I look at your bio, Turkey, which is another interesting economy we can talk about. And certainly, and then finally, the country manager for EBRD, again, a good friend of AIFC, Ozhan. Thank you very much all for coming. Now, the format of the session is I'm going to ask a couple of questions and ask each of the speakers to respond. And then, as I said, at the end of those, we'll have some questions. So Akylzhan is the Deputy Governor of the Central Bank, as I said, and there are two topics that we always talk about at central banks about. The first one is, particularly in this part of the world, is currencies, and the second is monetary policy. So on the first point, in terms of currencies, we obviously saw, with the start of the conflict between Russia and the Ukraine, a dislocation in the currency markets around the world, and in particular in this part of the world with Kazakhstan. Obviously, we've seen a rebound in the tenge since that time. I'd just be interested in your thoughts on the currency markets and the Kazakh currency market in particular, and how you see that evolving over the course of the next 12 to 18 months.
Thank you, Tim, for the question. First of all, I would like to say that the National Bank of Kazakhstan is a classical inflation target. We set policy interest rate. We don't follow any specific FX rate level. That's why we mostly on the interest rate side, not FX rate. And we look at the FX rate as a shock absorber for economy, which allow the economy to absorb, to adjust to the external shocks, to allow the economy to work properly without any serious damages in case of any significant shocks. However, I agree that any huge volatility in FX rates, it creates some risk for inflation, for financial stability, and really we see that tenge as well as our regional peers experience huge volatility, significant volatility last year, especially in February, March, when this geopolitical tension and conflict started, and really we intervene, we make some spot intervention on the market, and some days it may be the perception of the FX market, it was driven, I would like to say, more emotionally than maybe some rational expectations, because sometimes NBK may be like the sole seller of the FX. But yeah, and tenge experienced some significant volatility at that time. In the March we go up to 512 or something like this at currency exchange. After that, when some measures was implemented, like as I said, some spot intervention, we also introduced together with the government some additional 10% premium for tenge deposits, one-time lump sum for holding deposits more than 1 year, and we tighten monetary policy. Government also help us with the quasi-sovereign sector, which they guided them to sell some part of the export revenues, and it helped to the market. After that, we see some strengthening tenge up to 410 or 15. And after that, we see that tenge mostly returned to its pre-crisis, pre-war levels, and it continues now. What we additionally doing, we try to be more transparent to the market. And as you know, we announce all our action. We don't intervene now, but what we doing, we not just saying to the market how much we sell in last month, but we also now trying to announce what will be our action for the next month, for example, in terms of national oil fund transfers. And it's not a secret. We sell transfers from we sell FX from national oil fund to fulfill our obligations to transfer money to the state budget. And we doing it on the market neutrality principles. We're trying to support some market principles for a fixed rate, and we also announced our plans to buy some FX for unified accumulation pension fund to support its share in international share of investment on the international markets. And we try to be transparent as we can for the market, and to be to support the so-called maybe fair level and of a fixed rate, and to be as we can marketable based on a fixed rate. And we see, as I said, for the FX rate as a shock absorber. And I see that it's helped us, and FX market balanced. And for maybe future shocks, I believe all tools which we already implement in this shock, we can use it as a practice from our past. And yeah, I try to answer.
Yeah, no, it's a good answer. I'm from New Zealand, as some of you will know, and our currency over the last 18 months has gone from 55 to the dollar to 65 to the dollar, down back to 60, and it's a free flow currency. So exchange rates are volatile and very difficult to predict. A friend of mine runs a markets team at one of the major banks, and he said, I saw him about a year ago, he said, the currency will never go above 60. And when it went to 61, I said to him, what's going on? He goes, I'm taking a job as a weatherman. So, you really have no idea. So it's just a useful piece of context that it's a very difficult job to do, managing the exchange rate. And as you say, a very useful way of being a shock absorber on the currency. Of course, let's move on to interest rates or monetary policy, another key role of the central bank. A challenging environment with relatively or very high inflation in Kazakhstan and relatively high around the rest of the world. What does monetary policy look like going forward?
Yeah, I think it's also, as I previously said, that yes, we saw for monetary policy that our main tool, it's a base rate, it's our policy rate, and we set in it. And it's a good question, and what we are trying to do? We fight with the inflation. We see that inflation already slowed down. We try to our recent decision was to keep the rate at the same level. It's 16.75. Maybe somebody say it's too high. Somebody say maybe we don't fight with inflation with the passion, maybe, because I see, for example, economic growth for 4 months, it's 5%, and we see that maybe lost function of for GDP. In our case, it may be not so big, and somebody can say that we are more stimulating than tighten monetary policy. Yeah, but yeah, what we thinking about the monetary policy, about our future steps, we see that slowdown in inflation, it can create some room in the second half of this year for declining in base rate, but we will do it accurate in some. We try to receive more evidence to doing some steps in decreasing policy rate, and as you know, we increase our forecast for inflation for this year. It was done mainly due to reform in tariff for utilities and fuel prices, but we support government in these reforms. I believe it needed it necessity for our economy, but yeah, it creates some inflation pressure, and we'd like not react and not response to direct shocks from these reforms, but we will closely monitor and look at the so-called second round effect from the fuel prices and from the utility prices. That's why we maybe look not only the headline inflation, but also for the core inflation, which is already adjusted for these fuel prices, for utility inflation, and in case we will have more evidence about the slowdown on inflation in the second half of this year, we can make some steps, and we see some potential room for declining in policy rate.
Thank you very much. Yes, I don't know what is harder for central banks at the moment, certainly for those that are managing their currency or for trying to predict interest rate movements going forward. But you sound like every other central banker around the world, which is, we'll wait to see what the data says before we decide, but we expect interest rates to come down. The question is when, of course. One of the impacts will be, of course, on borrowing costs, and we're starting to see some economies or some countries coming out with budgets which have much higher interest service costs. What's your perspective on debt servicing costs going forward? Is this a concern for Kazakhstan?
I believe it will be declined with the decline of policy rate. Yeah, maybe it's quite high in nominal terms, but we also should take into account the high inflation. And what I believe that I don't see many investors who would like to invest their money at rate which is significantly below the inflation rate, because the main principle for investor is to keep the value of the investment from the inflation. That's why inflation is maybe the main topic which we should to take into account when we discuss the level of interest rates, because what I see that borrowing cost or cost of finance in any financing, it consists of three parts. One part is the cost of money, or future cost of money, which is really, I believe, linked not to our policy rate, but for the expectation of inflation. Because any investor, his natural intention is to keep the real value of his money. And in case of investors believe that we can achieve this low and stable inflation, in that case, they would like, they have an intention to give you money at relatively low interest rate. In case they don't believe us that we will fight with the inflation, I can set any interest rate, but they don't finance it. Yeah. The second part, it may be the credit risk. Yeah, it depends from something other. It depends from the situation in the economy, situation with the balance of rights of the borrower and lenders, etc., etc. It's a really complex topic which maybe should be discussed separately. And the third part, it's maybe the margin, the profit of banking, other companies which would like to earn something more over the yield curve. And it's mainly topic of the maybe regulation and competitiveness on the financial market. Yeah, that's why, to be honest, our actions, it's more about on how we manage inflation expectation of the business, of the investors, and are they trust to us that we can achieve this low and stable inflation. That's why we should fight with the inflation. We should maybe think about the borrowing cost, but in that terms, in that perspective. And I can repeat again that we can set any interest rate, but in case of market don't believe us that we will fight with the inflation, they don't invest at any rate.
That's a great answer. Thank you very much. And thoughts again that are echoed by lots of central bankers around the world at the moment, which is the number one priority is getting inflation down and setting the right expectations around inflation, so then you can have the right outcome in terms of interest rates. We'll now move on to talk a bit about the economy. And as I said before, Azamat has stepped in for his minister, who's been called away today to Parliament. So I will ask you these two questions together, because he will respond in Russian. So the first one is about the CPI. Obviously, it has an impact on lower socio-economic groups. I'm interested in what the government is doing to address that, and in particular, what things need to be done to address some of the more negative outcomes. And the second is the impact on the economy as a result of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Obviously, Russia is one of our biggest trading partners. How are those trade flows changed? Have they stabilised? And how do we expect those to evolve over time? So thank you very much. We appreciate your comments on those two questions.
Thank you for the question. Good morning, dear participants. Well, when it comes to the inflation, in 2022 we had 2.3%. That was our level of inflation. This is the world trend. It's not just for Kazakhstan. This is open market country. And of course, this problem didn't avoid us. And internally, if we consider the structure inside the goods the prices went up more than 25%. Those that are not food and the services went up too. So the main task, one of the most important tasks of the government that is struggling and fighting against this inflation and combating this event. So we have the action plan that was designed on the complex of measures in order to decrease the levels of inflation. It consists of specific measures, the middle term, and several directions depending on urgency. The main directions, of course, increasing the share of domestic products at the internal market, as well as developing the mechanism on storing and transportation, transporting the goods, supporting the retail trade, and regulating pricing, anti-monopoly legislation, and external trade legislation. So if we consider this complex of measures, when it comes to the share of domestically manufactured and produced goods, last year, when it comes on the processing of meat products, we have additional capacities built it on and modernized. We modernized many different factories on poultry production, fish production, and we created dairy farms. And this year we keep working in this direction in the same pace, and we believe that it will have a great impact on increasing the share of Kazakhstani goods. And as you know, weekly we have different fairs for agricultural companies. Sellers have their spots for free where the goods can be sold at a lower price. We also have systematic measures on funding and financing the business projects of constructing the greenhouses and different factories for the construction materials, the medical devices. A factory has been constructed as well. It will have an impact also on decreasing the level of inflation too. Speaking regionally, we have certain regions with a stable high level of inflation, Alata by region, Eastern Kazakhstan, and here specifically for each region we have designed the action plan on stabilization of the inflation, and these measures allow to decrease, as you know, according to the results of April, 16 and 8% of inflation, so the level has decreased 15.9%, yes, and this work is going on, and we see the results, and this trend will be continued. So, of course, the inflation growth has impact on our household, and I would like to emphasize that we have the program on increasing the revenue of the population, and it is done together with the executive bodies and authorities, and allows to have this focus on providing the workplaces. So generally speaking, at the Republican level, we have the program that consists of 5 main sectors, providing the workplaces in sectors of economy. And we also plan to forecast and to oversee before 2029 to provide more than 3 million workplaces. Mainly, here we are talking about the regional employment map. Besides, we have a certain project, Azamat, the name of the program. Here we scale up the cases, best practices in the regions. We scale up for the country and in other regions too. And here we work on distribution of those. We have other systematic measures on stimulating the entrepreneurship activities, and to subsidize different rates and roadmaps and DKB program. And another line here, we should emphasize the budget means in order to increase the level of the salary for civilians. We plan to increase the wages and salaries of the doctors, teachers. The average salary, for instance, for the doctors will be 28 plus, 20% plus, and medical employees will achieve it too. Also, we have specific target indicators. We are achieving those. And of course, we need financing. Now, I would like to mention about the influence of the budget on the whole situation here. In general, if we consider and look at the Republican budget during the second year, if we compare annually more than 40%, we give the growth results. More than 2 trillions of tenge we add to the budget. This year, if we consider 4 months, we have more than 120% of growth comparing to the similar period last year. So in general, we think that we have all the basis to decrease the inflation, and most important, we have the financial provisions for those measures that we have forecasted. So in general, what I wanted to say about the impact of the conflict on our economy, a few words. Despite the crisis situation, those negative factors that we have, according to the results of last year, we have the pace of growth 33%, and also those trends that we have, this tends 5%, as it was mentioned by the colleague before that took the floor before me. We have the positive dynamic of paces in all spheres, on all sectors of industry, and mostly in construction and trade and IT, in process and industry. Here, speaking about the forecast of the government, the official 4%, it was approved, but according to those trends that we see now, still we have the target of 5% growth. That's what we plan. And of course, the sanction policy had the impact for sure, and it allowed to redistribute the trade flows. The external trade turnover increased 134 billion tenge. Export has grown 40% plus. Import 21% plus. And so the trade balance positive 82% plus. And it is clear that before, distribution of the goods of the Western manufacturers went through Russia mainly, but some companies, Western companies that left Russia, it allowed us to have the direct delivery straight to Kazakhstan. If we consider the investments of that situation that we have now, it did not have any influence on inflow. And if we compare to 2013, in 2022, the largest growth of the direct investment comparing to 2021, 18% plus. And when it comes to the investment, it did not have any influence on that. And as you know, we have approved this year the concept of investment policy, which is targeted to transparency, simplification of all the procedures, and here we have many tools provided, and myself, I work on the taxation policy and budget policy. We are aware last year such tools as strategic agreements, if we have investment more than $50 million, and then these agreements we stabilize by means of legislation. So at the moment of having this agreement signed, that legislation that is that has legal force during 25 years, it does not change. We have investment tax committees, and we also had those changes to the tax code, and there are many different tools like that, and the work in this direction is going on. Thank you.
There are some very positive numbers in your remarks. Let's move on now to Samruk-Kazyna, and Yernar is going to talk about the privatization program, which is always AIX's favourite topic. Firstly, interested in your comments on the KMG IPO. It was certainly a landmark event in the financial markets last year. You know, what went well? What can we learn from that going forward?
Thank you, Tim. Yeah, I believe the IPO of Kazmunaygaz is a story of total success, and here it is why. First of all, it was the largest ever local listing with a book of $330 million. Secondly, the composition of investors is very balanced. 52% is about retail investors, and 48% coming from the institutional investors. And here we worked heavily also on the compliance part of this process, because I personally cut a number of orders with quite significant ticket sizes in order to make it in compliance with best practice. We also avoided the concentration of shares in one hands. So finally, we believe we could reach the right balance of investors. Apart from that, the shares, I mean the IPO share price was just over 8,400, and today it is around 10,000, so giving like over 20% of upside. And till these days, I was like avoiding any comments on the results of IPO of KMG, saying, well, the post-IPO liquidity will show if it was successful. And today I can definitely say that it was a very successful IPO, because the average daily liquidity equals to around $2 million, which is outstanding for the local listing, for the local company, listed company. I mean, liquidity actually makes this this security is quite interesting among the wider range of investors. Renat Bekturov and the governor says that in order to make it happen, I mean the story of IPO of Kazmunaygaz, all the planets had to converge on the same axis, on the same line. I would say in order to make it happen, there had to be a good willingness of key people who were driving this process, who were making the final decisions. And of course, initially, there were so many unknowns, and we were struggling even with the alternative tools, like just second-tier bank deposits, which still provide like over 13 or even 14% of interest rate, or even the national bank notes, they pay over 16%. And of course, I mean, when we go public locally, we have to take into account all these instruments, all these options for the investors. But of course, I mean, our final decision to go public locally taking into account the good practice of Saudi Aramco, which was listed at Tadawul, was the right decision. And the joint team of Samruk-Kazyna, of Kazmunaygas, of our investment bankers, Freedom, Halyk Finance, or Halyk Finance, BCC Invest, Skybridge, Sholpan is here, right? So, I mean, this joint team, we were reaching every point in Kazakhstan, I mean, every destination, even covering the villages. We heavily used all new financial technologies. We used the applications of Halyk Bank and Center Credit Bank, and finally we could reach, I mean, to this largest, or I mean, the biggest order size with the number of orders over 130,000. So that was, I believe, that was a story of total success.
It certainly was. I've been involved in a couple of IPOs in New Zealand where there's been a large degree of retail involvement, but nothing like the success that you had with KMG. And also, for a reference point, any IPO that you get more than 1 times free float market capitalisation in the first year is always a success. So you've certainly achieved that, or at least so far. So well done. Of course, they always want me to ask questions about future IPOs. So let's move on to perhaps you can comment on Air Astana and other potential IPO candidates in the privatisation program. And of course, we'd like some specific comments, but I think it would also be useful to comment on, you know, what are the considerations you look for in terms of where the capital markets are at, how ready the company is for the IPO, so that we can get a better sense of what you're thinking about when it comes to timing for some of these privatisations.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Air Astana. I would say Air Astana is already ready for IPO. Yeah, I mean, they had outstanding 2022 year with the revenues over $1 billion. It's again, I mean, the largest ever revenues they had in their history. Their net income is around $80 million, which is also the largest one. They paid good dividends to SK and the second shareholder, BAE Systems. The corporate governance of the company is perfect, so it is ready for IPO. But of course, we have to, I mean, and we were proposing the local stock exchanges for going public this year. We even could find a good, reputable international investor with, I would say, anchor investor with a good ticket for this IPO. But of course, we have to respect the position of the second shareholder, which is BAE Systems, and they consider that Air Astana has to be listed at, I mean, international stock exchange plus local stock exchange. So the talks are still there. We are talking, we are discussing, we are trying to find the right option. But preliminarily, we are planning to go for IPO with Air Astana in 2024, because we believe by that time, that volatility at international stock exchanges, international markets, has to settle down, and hopefully we'll go there. But with the rest companies, we're optimistic. There is Kigok, our grid operator. The company is ready. We already have all legislative approvals. And I believe we go for SPO sometime this year. It will be local listing. So we already hired investment bankers, and the work is in process. The rest companies, we have railways company. In accordance with the decree of the government, the IPO year is 2025. But again, we have to consider that there is a quite debt burden, and railways has to work on this debt in order just to make it more attractive. We have Kazakhgas, the right company, the good company. Right now they're working on their gas reserves in order to be more sustainable. And once we finalize all these aspects of equity story, I believe we will be ready for IPO. Again, preliminarily we are planning for 2025. We also working on our portfolio of green assets. There is a company, Kazakh Green Power, which is a part of Samruk Energy. In accordance with our plans, we want to accumulate all our hydro stations and all our renewable projects under this company. So right now we are considering the right probably structure and the right option for going public. But these days, during the Astana International Forum, we'll be hosting the top management of Total Energies, French Total Energies, and the Minister of Energy is signing a PPA, power purchase agreement, with this company. So we, as Samruk-Kazyna and KMG as well, we are part of this big project. And there are some other projects coming up with Masdar, with Aqua Power. All these renewable projects will be under this Kazakh Green Power. So once we finalize the right structure, we'll be ready for IPO as well. And here I just want to use this opportunity to congratulate AIFC team, Renat, with that outstanding milestone, joining the Abu Dhabi Exchange Hub. He mentioned about having a wide range of securities, investment tools, but I would say it will help to increase liquidity. And probably AX will be considered as a good substitute for any other international stock exchanges.
Great, thank you very much. It's a very detailed summary of where the privatisation program is at, and very positive. We look forward to seeing this evolve over the next couple of years. I don't know whether it's by chance, but we seem to have the government representatives on one side of the stage and the private sector representatives on the other. So, Elena, if we can move to you now, and we've heard the the government's view of how the economy is doing. What's the rating agency's view of Kazakhstan at the moment? What should we be looking out for, and what's the outlook?
Thanks very much, team. It's great to be here. It's great to share the panel with such distinguished speakers, and thank you very much for having S&P here today. I'd like to, first of all, to start with a note that I'm not an analyst and I'm not taking part in decision-making process on any ratings actions. So should you have any questions on particular ratings, I will have to refer you to my analytical colleagues. So I had to start with this disclaimer because I know there's always interest to what S&P is doing in the region. We've been working in Kazakhstan since 1996, so you may imagine we've accumulated a huge experience, a great portfolio of clients in all of the sectors of the economy. So to address your question, team, there's been a very, I would say, good start of the year for Kazakhstan. Two major events to mention here. First is the change of outlook.
Изменение прогноза.
Armenia, Costa Rica. So you may find more details in the report, but in my view, that's a good news. And in our view, Kazakhstan banking system largely resolved the interruption of the Russian banking activity in 2022. through market-based solution and with regulatory support. Russia's banks downsized their operations in Kazakhstan quite rapidly, and we saw that the redistribution of client bases and team transitions from the banks downsizing their operations on the Kazakhstani market was very smooth and went quite rapidly. The Russian banks made up about 14% of the system-wide deposits. So as a result of downscaling, the banking system, as we see it now, has become more concentrated, and local market, the local banks' positions on the market improved. My analytical colleagues covering Kazakhstan banking sector believe that at the moment the banking system of Kazakhstan faces the 2023 challenges with better resilience buffers than in prior downturn cycles. And I'd like to mention the positives, and let's forget for a moment the rule of three. I actually counted 7 positives for the Kazakhstan banking system, and I believe it's worth mentioning them all. So, good level of capitalization, structurally liquid balance sheets with most funding coming from customer deposits, which reduces reliance on external debt. Good earning generation capacity supported by good margin and sound efficiency. Protracted, diligent workout of accumulated problem loans in the back of mild credit losses. Fairly modest level of FX-denominated loan book, diminishing sensitivity to currency fluctuations. Relatively moderate levels of household indebtedness in global context. And last but not least, improving regulatory framework and supervision in the banking sector. So to wrap up, what's the focus for 2023 that we are watching closely? High interest rate environment and elevated inflationary pressure. Retail segment in Kazakhstan, which is growing with very rapid pace, and thus there's always risk of deterioration of asset quality. And of course, I mean, it's an elephant in the room that remains here. Unexpected geopolitical and macroeconomic situation in the region.
Great, thank you. Also very positive. But of course, that's not necessarily the perspective that offshore investors have on Kazakhstan. And you cover a broad range of countries in the region, as I said before. You know, where does Kazakhstan sit? And in particular, you didn't touch on it, but certainly, or you may have right at the end have implied, you know, what are the risks of things like secondary sanctions affecting the economy? So I'd be interested in your perspective on that as well.
Well, let me start with sanctions. For the time being, we see the secondary sanctions risk as moderate, and we've been quite blunt about it in our report. As to the investors, while you were asking the question, an article popped up in my memory by The Economist, which was called "Let's Make Europe Boring Again." So it's and I think they were rephrasing an early article dating back to the 90s saying boring Western economy. So why boring is good in this context, really? Because investors like boring, because boring is clear and predictable. And that's what the investors are looking at. As Mr. Baimagambetov was saying earlier, the investors want clarity and predictability. So we're not yet there. We're still very exciting, still very interesting, less boring. So we are looking to get a little bit of that kind of boring into Kazakhstan and the markets in the region, I would say. So Kazakhstan is an investment-grade credit for us, and it's really not the hard metrics, the debt, the fiscal position, the external position that are holding the rating down. It's when you get into softer aspects like transparency, development of the private sector, the banking sector regulation, that is what the main focus for the investors is, and that's what they'll be looking to see in Kazakhstan developing more and more going forward. So diversifying the economy, one way to show the development is privatization of the state enterprises, and this was covered pretty closely and in a very detailed manner, so great. We're looking forward to hear more about that. Increasing the population's wealth levels, that's also one of the priorities that stands in front of the government. We see that the government is looking at diversifying the economy through capital investment, and there's quite a huge figure, I would say, that we see that the pool of investment projects under consideration now amounts to an estimate of 26% of GDP. So that's pretty tremendous, I would say. Does this answer your question? Happy to add.
Yeah, just maybe a more straightforward way of asking it. Where does Kazakhstan sit in the region? Are we attractive relative to the other countries you cover? I mean, what's the moving away from some of the hard metrics as you call them, the credit rating, etc. There's obviously some softer aspects around the geopolitical situation. Is Kazakhstan a good investment destination relative to some of our, quite frankly, countries that are competing for the same pool of capital, international capital?
Well, we have a very, I would say, a popular answer to this question. S&P ratings, as S&P ratings, we don't advise. We provide an opinion on the creditworthiness. So, as a provider of the opinion on the creditworthiness, the opinion sits in the investment grade, and that's the answer, right? So, of course, I mean, cultivating the investment climate, reducing state participation of the economy, increasing private sector, these are the factors that would make Kazakhstan more attractive for the investors. But for the time being, I think the positives that I've listed, they are there. They are here in Kazakhstan.
Thank you very much. It's easier to get an answer out of the central bank than the rating agency, it seems. But anyhow, we'll move on, which isn't always the case either. Why don't we move on now and get firstly the EBRD's perspective on economic growth. You've upped the target growth rate this year a little bit. What are the drivers of that, and what do you see perhaps over the next couple of years?
Thank you very much. It's a great honor and pleasure to be here as part of this distinguished panel as well, with our main counterparts on one side, and we're on this side. And also thank you for classifying us as private sectors. We are a supranational owned by 71 different countries, but this is exactly how we want to be perceived as well, because we are supporting the private sector and private sector development. So thanks very much for that. So yes, indeed, we have revised our economic growth estimate for Kazakhstan. It was 3.2 last year. It was revised up to 3.5, and then we revised it again in May to 3.9 for 2023. And actually, we have our regional economist here, who is the analyst who is basically giving these estimates as well. But first, I want to mention that over the past 3 years, the world, we have witnessed significant and unprecedented challenges. The world has not seen challenges this magnitude in a long time, with the pandemic, with the geopolitics going on right now, which caused disruptions on the food and energy supply chains, which drove up inflation, I will come to that later on, and amplified the existing inequalities. So these persistent underlying challenges and heightened geopolitical tensions and elevated the public debt levels, and the current economic outlook is certainly uncertain. before we move on to Kazakhstan and look deeper into Kazakhstan, I want to give a few of the specifics about the region, which will give a little bit of some of the hints for Kazakhstan as well. So Central Asian economies as a whole have proven very resilient to the adverse geopolitical developments and also related to the war in Ukraine. So all the economies in the region strengthened their trade cooperation with Russia as a result of its forced pivot to Asia. This was also mentioned both by the central bank and also Minister of National Economy, both by Akylzhan and Azamat. And then the volume of money transfers also to Central Asia has skyrocketed, increasing the deposits in the banking sector, which is also outlined, making the banking sector more resilient and also boosting the profits as well. So I think this is the reverse causality here is important to note. The relocation of Russian firms and individuals also strengthened the demand in the retail, real estate and hospitality sectors across the Central Asia. This certainly applies to Kazakhstan as well. And so in the first quarter of 2023, the growth continued across the region, while the inflation in most economies is still far above the targets set by these economies as well, by their central banks as well. So overall, when we look at the region again, the economies are probably going to continue to grow in the short term, but the uncertainty also at the last sentence underlined by Elena is that it is going to be very much dependent upon those external shocks that we could see on the geopolitics front. So coming to Kazakhstan, let me give a few numbers. So in 2022, economy grew by 3.2%, despite the intermittent technical difficulties at the CPC, which was outlined as well, which increases the risks. Exports demonstrated remarkable resilience, also supported by the high oil prices, which was about 40% up on year-on-year basis. So the growth has increased almost to 5% in the first quarter of 2023. So this, we need to also see what is the construction of this growth? What are the components of this growth? So construction sector, which grew 18% on a year-on-year basis. Fixed capital investment, this is very important, and also with the lack of or the small banking sector in Kazakhstan, we still see significant fixed capital investment. This was 16.1%. The retail trade turnover increased by 12.1%. Industry grew by 2.8%, a modest 2.8%, and agriculture 3.5%. So, despite the efforts of Akylzhan and the central bank, of course, with the tight monetary policy and to scale back the involvement of also the support, the significant support mechanisms introduced during the pandemic through the stimulus programs especially, the inflationary pressures still continue, and with the rising transport, food and commodity prices on the back of. So the annual inflation, when we look at it, it peaked at around 21.3% in February, and then dropping down to 18.1% and in March. And I think we will see further decreasing of inflation throughout the year. So Kazakhstan economic outlook stands to benefit from the relocation of the Russian firms, basically. Investment in the new activities related to the exit of major global players out of Russia, ongoing efforts to diversify the transport and oil routes. planned reforms, which I will come into later on if we have time, to improve the business climate, reduce the barriers to entry, especially there are quite a bit of current efforts on the mining sector, and to reduce the footprint of politically exposed persons. This will be an important reform going forward in the economy. If implemented, is going to increase as an upside the growth opportunities in Kazakhstan. And when we look at the downside, of course, downside risks, we can say that the inflationary pressures, which I mentioned, especially on the back of the commodity prices and oil and gas. And we are expecting, to reiterate, Kazakhstan economy to grow by 3.9% in 2023 and 4.2% in 2024. So I'll leave it here for now.
Azamat talked a bit about some of the reforms, in particular to address the high inflation rate. I know when we talked before, you said you've got a very long answer on reforms. So let's hear the EBRD's view on what needs to change.
Well, what needs to change is also quite difficult to say, but what could be changed and what are the potential opportunities for policy engagement and reforms, I will dwell into with a little bit of focus on EBRD's strategy. Well, not only EBRD, but EBRD and Kazakhstan's mutual strategy here. But I want to point out first that we celebrated our 30 year of operations and existence in Kazakhstan last year. So it's been 31 years. We've been here from almost the very beginning. We have invested a total of more than 10 billion euros in more than 310 projects in Kazakhstan up until now. So across the spectrum of all sectors, which are also supported significantly by our policy engagement. So we do have also some mutual history of development. So we have an idea on where, taking also into account the global trends as well, where the reform process and the progress should be based on. So from that point of view, I would like to focus on 3 areas in terms of where we see or where we are also active. There are many more areas, of course, that is looked into, deeply looked into, but I would like to focus on 3 areas. First area is going to be, I'll focus on the financial sector and the SME development. Secondly, we will focus on some of the infrastructure with underscoring the Trans-Caspian route, which the importance is going to be increasing given the current geopolitical case, and especially for Kazakhstan and the region. And thirdly, I'd like to talk a little bit about decarbonization and the energy sector with a focus on renewables especially. We heard some very good remarks from Yernar on Kigok, on green energy company to be established under Samruk-Kazyna, also the big investments that are coming in. And there are also a few other developments which are quite exciting actually, which I will go into. But let's start with the financial sector and the SME development. So the problem, or what we are discussing here today, is how Kazakhstan can reset its economic development model and also generate growth at a constant level with an ambitious target. And so this can be looked at from many fronts. You know, we can look at it from human capital, we can look at it external context and connectivity, which I will go into in the second one, governance measures, and also the competitive framework. However, EBRD's experience mainly on the SME front is going to be very important here. So we talked about the short-term or recent macroeconomic outlook, but when we take a step back and then look at the macro outlook, we can see that the growth rates in Kazakhstan have actually declined compared to the early years. So since 2008, we're seeing relatively low rates of growth, and this catch up, and it is not showing too much signs of recovery back to the elevated levels in the early days. And despite the fact that the banking sector overall looks healthier, of course, lots of positive developments started with the AQRs. The current capitalization is good, depository base is good, banks are profitable, everything is nice, but the banking sector is too small to support the economy to go into the next steps. This is very important. And then when it comes to the fixed capital, quite a lot of FDI comes in, but this needs to be also supported by additional lending. So third one is SMEs. When you look at the SME market, depending on which data set that you look into, it's between 25 to 33% of the economic activity is generated out of the SMEs. But when you look at the composition of these SMEs as well, you have the tiny companies, 1.5 million of very tiny micro-sized companies, and then very little medium-sized companies, and then you have the big giant investors. The big resilience that I'm a Turkish citizen, I'm coming from Turkey, I was deputy head of Turkey before as well. The resilience in Turkey, for example, of the economy actually comes from the SMEs, comes from the private sector, diversified base of SMEs. So if that can be replicated in Kazakhstan, it will certainly increase the resilience of the economy, and it will also increase the growth opportunities of the economy as well. So how do we square or how do we get out of this predicament? How can we make sure that the SMEs, or how the banking sector can support the SMEs? So from this point of view, I have 3 initial suggestions, and I will have 3 other suggestions afterwards. So the initial suggestions is that strengthening the competition in the financial markets is going to be number 1. So according to a number of studies, actually one that we have done together with the Ministry of National Economy through the Economic Research Institute, it suggests that the market, the banking sector in Kazakhstan is actually in an oligopolistic structure, which means that the competition can be increased, and it can serve to make a much larger base of clients. And the liquidity in the also banking sector is also mainly invested into the risk-free asset bases of the government per se, of the government paper per se, and instead of more placement to the projects, investment projects, especially smaller companies. So number 2, we need to think of ways to improve the efficiency and promote product innovation in the market, and also in the financial market as well. Kaspi is an excellent example. We're all talking about it. What a unicorn! But this could be also increased further into the SME market as well. So further digitalization will help the SME market. And we are seeing some sparks, I can comfortably say. And number 3, how we can make the SMEs larger and more bankable, and also not only the participants in the banking sector, but also how can we integrate them into the capital markets? So injection of further capital into the SMEs to make them larger, to make their impact into the economy larger. So these are here innovation and digitalization through inclusive growth is going to be the key. So final suggestions on the SME side. Actually, two simple ones. Number 1, for example, Samruk-Kazyna has a lot of assets, and they have started doing this through a program to offload the non-core assets of Samruk-Kazyna and to expand this even further. Not only Samruk-Kazyna, but the large operations, the large conglomerates in Kazakhstan should get rid of their non-core assets. This will certainly increase the number of SMEs and the opportunities for those smaller companies, the private sector, to come in. This is number one suggestion. Number two suggestion. Well, by the way, this number one suggestion is implemented very successfully in Israel, for example. Number two, why not the regulator, together with the central bank, can impose a target for the banking sector for placements to a certain degree. For example, 20% of their assets should be lending to SMEs. This will certainly increase both the supply side and the demand side as well. So these two combined will have a positive impact. And third, there are a lot of subsidization and programs that can be also streamlined. Instead of very expensive and hefty cashbacks, for example, guarantee structures, guarantee schemes can be applied on a portfolio basis, for example, creating the same incentive structures but much cheaper. That will also reduce the impact on the budget as well. Which metric I want to mention here. In order to be able to have this, the study estimated that in addition to the soft measures I just mentioned, for example, digitalization of the custom documents, there needs to be more than $18 billion of investments that needs to be carried out under 32 priority projects across the corridor. These include railway projects, these include port projects, these also include road and supporting infrastructure projects as well. And being able to create the necessary underlying laws and regulations that will support the private sector to come into this place, together with the IFIs and other international financiers. This can be done in the medium term, which will also help the economy to grow further. Finally, I'd like to talk about the decarbonization and the energy, especially with a focus on the renewable sector. A few good developments, but there are a few things that needs to be done as well. First of all, we're very happy to see that the long-term decarbonization strategy for Kazakhstan until 2060 has been approved earlier this year. And this sets out the basis and what can be done for the decarbonization of Kazakh economy. And the main component here is going to be the renewable sector. And last week, we're also very happy to see that there will be, in addition to the large investments that Yernar indicated, together with the Aquas, Mazdas, Total Eren, etc. of this world, is going to be the 6.7 gigawatts of renewable auctions that will be commissioned in the next 3 years. This will help, together with the large projects, this will allow Kazakhstan to have its renewable share of electricity by 2030 more than 15%. These regulations introduced and the improvements on the power purchase agreements and the direct investments that can be done by the international investors is going to help the decarbonization efforts in the country. Finally, what can be done on this to further allow the decarbonization across the sectors? Two things that I would like to mention which are important, and then I will stop. Number one is going to be Kazakhstan can join the global methane pledge. Methane is one of the highest impact emissions that affects the high CO2 emissions across the economy. Joining the global methane pledge, lots of additional funds can be unlocked that can be used to create a sustainable reduction of these emissions. And I think this would be an important step for Kazakhstan to take forward. And number two is the low-carbon pathways. The detailed sectoral low-carbon pathways need to be developed and implemented going forward to allow sustainable development via green and greener investments. I want to close by indicating that as EBRD we promised to our shareholders that we will be investing 50% of our total investments across all countries into green investments, and as of the beginning of this year all the projects that we finance are going to be aligned with the Paris Agreement. Okay, I'll leave it here. Thank you.
It's a very good list. Thank you very much. I'm not sure New Zealand farmers would quite agree with your assessment of methane, but yes, we can discuss that afterwards perhaps. But it is a topic for AIFC as well, of course, is how can we contribute both on financing but also in terms of the carbon market. So thank you very much for raising that. We'd now like to ask the floor if you've got any questions for any of our speakers. I assume we have some microphones. If you want to raise your hand, someone will bring you a microphone. And if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and directing a question to one of the speakers. Thank you.
Я представляю.
I represent Kazakhstani Association of Minority Shareholders. We are the participants of the AIFC. I have the question to Samruk-Kazyna representative. He said that Kazmunaygas IPO was a successful one, but why then the first annual meeting of shareholders of Kazmunaygas were conducted not in person, and then the publication on the results of this meeting was delayed. On 30th of May it was a meeting, but the results were published only yesterday. The second question, the head of the state, Mr. Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, last year was speaking about the risk that Samruk-Kazyna could just, kind of disappear. How did you manage not to, let's say, disappear? What did you do for that? And the next question is the following one. Samruk-Kazyna was established as Temasek from Singapore, like Temasek from Singapore. Do you see any gap between the existing Temasek and Samruk-Kazyna? And if there is such a gap, how do you plan to overcome this gap, to fix this gap? Then next question is about Kazakh Telecom. The state property shall give more than 27% to Samruk-Kazyna. What are you going to do in future with this share? So the questions were in Russian. Let me comment in Russian as well. So the part of your questions are not connected with my competences. So I would recommend you to submit the official request, and then I think the persons responsible for this will provide you the reply. As for the first question, I would agree. Yes, the first annual meeting of shareholders should have been conducted in person. That was a wrong decision. As soon as I received this information, I started to raise this issue. I addressed it to Kazmunaygas, and I received the reply that it was a proposal, and in that case it was a decision of the chairman of the BOD, Mr. Chris Walton. And to be honest, the arguments that I have heard, they were quite weak. But along with this, when I said let us do it in person, I mean let's do it annual meeting of shareholders in person, I was told that we can do it in person instead of this, but then we have to wait for 30 or 40 days so that after the announcement we would conduct the meeting. But those dividends that should have been paid from Kazmunaygas, you know, it's just that they wanted to pay these dividends as fast as they can. The fund also wanted to receive this dividend fast because these dividends, they form, the dividends of the fund are forming the, let's say, state budget. And let me remind you that about 2 or 3 years ago, Kazmunaygas paid just 30, 40 billion tenge of dividends. That was the largest oil and gas company, but these were these dividends. And then before IPO, you know, we changed the situation, and in our prospect we wrote that we are giving our promise to pay dividends, to pay good dividends. We even identified the amount, about 250 billion tenge. But finally, after the long internal analysis and negotiations jointly with Kazmunaygas, we were able to receive the amount for the approval, and the amount was 300 billion tenge. We have never had it through the whole history of Kazmunaygas. And taking into account this intention to receive this money from Kazmunaygas as fast as possible and then to pay it to the state budget so that to replenish the state budget, the decision was made. I mean, it was a collegial decision, although maybe from corporate point of view it was not wrong, but it was not right, but they decided to have this meeting. However, the next meeting will be in person. So this decision was made, and in 20th of June, it will be the next meeting of shareholders, and it will be in person. And the convocation has already been announced. Question number 2 and 3, I cannot answer them. But as for Kazakh Telecom, I can say that right now the state municipal property organizations, they assess the assets of Kazakh Telecom so that later to transfer to Samruk-Kazyna fund. As soon as we receive this share, I think it's about 28%, our fund will have, let's say, bigger share of presence in Kazakh Telecom. But what to do with this share, you know, we haven't decided it yet. We haven't been discussing this issue yet, and we need to discuss it. And I would say that we need to discuss it at the governmental level. So that's why, for now, I cannot say anything specific with regard to it. But we are always ready to keep in touch with the public and with your organization, the organization or association of independent minority shareholders. We will make you aware about the situation, but again, this information will be available for everyone, for the public. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Flora Huan. I'm a law professor in the UK. I'm also a EU arbitrator in the investment and the trade. My question is, thank you very much for all the speakers' fascinating talk. My question is, from the Kazakhstan trade record, we could see that Russia is always a major trading partner for the Kazakhstan. But now also could see, read a lot of news, Kazakhstan have a lot of the agreement with China. In particular, last month, the two countries that just signed the 47 agreement, they worth over $20 billion. So, and also at the beginning, the governor said that the AIFC, that they have a cooperation with the Abu Dhabi. So I just wonder, what is the position of Kazakhstan in the future? So how the Kazakhstan the position itself as either ally of China, or they want to make the more cooperation with the Middle East, want to build a hub between the Central Asia and the Middle East. So what is the position of Kazakhstan? Thank you.
You know, do you want to, well, Azamat, do you want to answer that question?
Да, попытаюсь я.
Yes, I will try to answer this question. You know, nowadays, this is a situation. Our geographical location is between Russia and China, and I think, yes, we are the hub. This geographical position, we need to use it efficiently, and this is one of our main tasks. And in my opinion, yes, you are right. We will become this hub, and we need to put all our efforts so that the transit, so that Kazakhstan would become this transit country between the two large economies, two countries.
Emphasise from AIFC's perspective that, of course, while we have a focus on the Middle East, China is certainly an important partner and source of investment capital for AIFC. Have we got time for one final question?
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Me here. Okay. Я задам вопрос на русском.
I will ask my question in Russian language. The question to Mr. Yernar Zhanadil. I represent TGS Energy, but now I have a question from our partner, Austrian company that is now interacting with Samruk-Energo. You have mentioned in your speech about the fact that there is a program on renewable sector. There is Kazakh Green Energy Company, Kazakh Green Power Company was established. And my question is, will we now cooperate with Samruk-Energo? Kazakh Green Power will be the subsidiary of Samruk-Kazyna. What is the decision, and is there any? Thank you so much for your question. Nowadays, Kazakh Green Power is in part of Samruk-Energo group, and not all assets, not all hydropower plants were transferred to Kazakh Green Power. So if you have any specific question on cooperation, you can address to Samruk-Energo, to Kazakh Green Power, and then we have the unified team. And from the very beginning, when we were raising this issue on the establishment of this subsidiary, we have received the instruction from the government not to expand the staff, and when we were creating Kazakh Green Power, we made it with the conditions that part of people of Samruk-Energo will move to the new company. So we reduce the budget of Samruk-Energo, but we allocate this part for the budget of this newly established green company. So the staff or the team is working here or there, so you can address directly to Samruk-Energo, to Kazakh Green Power. I think here and there you will receive the replies to your.
Okay, one final question from the front, and then we will call it a day.
Hi, my name is Antonio Riera, and I sit on the board of AIFC. The World Bank did a study that the highly liquid capital markets and highly developed banking systems increase the GDP by 1.5%, depending on the balance. In the beginning, thought that they competed with each other, but they actually reinforce each other. If you had a magic wand, what would you do as a government in order to really bring the liquidity and grow the capital market here?
That's probably a good final question, Antonio. So I don't know, perhaps we can get a perspective from EBRD, and then one of the government representatives could comment.
Well, magic wand, that's nice. I think the government would also like that. But unfortunately, it's not going to be very easy. But I will retract back and then build on to what I said about SMEs, because I'm a true believer of the power of diversification and power of SMEs as part of the economy. So from that point of view, and this is an area where I think it is lacking the most for the stable Kazakh economy. So if the magic wand was there, I think it would have been great to have the capital markets and this big liquidity within the capital markets to be basically channeled through for the further development of the SMEs, and through the structure that is set up here, which I think is also very conducive to be able to support that. So through AIFC, having ample amount of SMEs that is tapping the capital markets with the ample amount of supply that support those SMEs, I think would be the wish for a magic wand for the economy of Kazakhstan.
Thank you very much. Yernar, would you like to comment on that question, or Akylzhan?
I try.
Yeah.
I would like to have more than one magic one. As a central bank in my maybe first idea, it's about the inflation, low inflation, and what I would like to say that maybe macroeconomic stability is not enough to grow rapidly, but without the macroeconomic stability, the sustainable economic growth is not possible. And that's why we are so patient about the inflation as a part of macroeconomic stability. What I believe that we have a more or less sound banking system, and Elena already gives some evidence about the external assessment of that we have some positive side on that in that sector. Yeah, I agree that capital market may be one of our maybe gap with other markets that we have our financing its economy. It was maybe mostly developed on the banking side, and we maybe don't have a huge liquid capital market. We try to do it, but again and again we discuss how banks should to finance the economy, etc., and it's the permanent discussion between the central bank, government, etc., and I agree that maybe a deep liquid capital market will be help us and to the central bank as well, because it's doing some transmission of our policy to economy, and it help us with that side. I agree that deep and liquid capital market, it's the magic one maybe. But again, as a central banker, maybe I'm thinking permanently about the low, stable inflation and the macroeconomic stability, but I agree that the capital market is very important.
Great, thank you very much. That's a very good end comment to this session. Thanks to all the speakers. Thanks for your participation from the audience, and I hope you have an enjoyable rest of the day. Thank you very much.